A bad man knew he was going to go to hell if it existed. And one day, finally, he died a violent death, just as he had meted out violent deaths to so many before him. And he died, and his spirit exited his body and descended to the other world, to that place of horrors and torture eternal. He reached the gate. And when he reached the gate, there stood a poll booth, a voting booth. And on this voting booth, he saw many names. He saw Lucifer, Baal, Beelzebub, and many other names, of some of which he recognized as former gods and goddesses, some of which he recognized as supposedly being demon names, or and of course Lucifer, and a few others. Many he did not know. And he looked at their names, and he looked at their titles, he looked at the names of their domains, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? Because at the top of the voting booth's list of demons, with their pictures in their most horrific poses, of course, it said, choose your doom. And so the man thought, well, I guess it means that I get to choose who is in charge of my eternal punishments. And he thought to himself, well, clearly I don't want to be in the realm of Lucifer, because he's a fearsome leader of the angels who were overthrown by God, and he clearly would want to be the most fearsome and horrific torturer of our souls. So definitely not him. And one by one, he eliminated all of the demons except for one, based on the name, their domain, etc., until he had it down to one demon who didn't look quite so fearsome as all the others, didn't have a name he recognized, and seemed to be in a domain that was, well, not so horrible. In fact, it had something to do with bamboo. And he thought to himself, how bad can it be? Pandas eat bamboo, and this guy looks not quite so scary. So he pushed the button for that demon, and instantly he was transported from in front of the voting booth to a completely different environment, an environment out of his nightmares. For even though he was a murderer many times over, he still had nightmares. And there were not groves of bamboo trees or anything like that. There were instruments of torture made of bamboo. Some he recognized. One of them looked kind of like an Iron Maiden. But it was all designed from bamboo, with stakes that would impale you when the door was closed, and would force you against other stakes in the back or in the sides, and you would bleed out. Of course, being a soul, you can't bleed out, but he guessed he probably could feel that pain. So it could last a very, 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 very long time. There was a rack, thumb screws, of course, bamboo splinters to put under the fingernails, and many other things which he feared to even try to figure out. But he knew they would be at least as bad as the ones he recognized, if not worse. And he thought to himself, wow, I'm in trouble. And then that demon that he had chosen appeared in the room and said, choose. And he said, I choose none. The demon said, choose, or you get them all. So He walked around this very, very large room, looked at each and every contraption that he could find until he got to a corner where there were bamboo poles, and they had been attached to a frame that held them in place. And he thought, well, that doesn't look so bad. Maybe he's going to have me run into him over and over again. That can't be too horrible. And he pointed to that. He said, I choose that one. And the demon leered at him and said, begin. And so he ran himself into the bamboo poles. And the demon watched him for a while laughing. And he said, no. That amused me, but no. It's not enough. I want you to take a bamboo pole, put it against your head, hold on to it with both hands, and I want you to wrap it around your head. And the man said, what? How can I do that? I'm not strong enough. Certainly you are. You are not in a mortal body. You are in no body at all. You have a lot of strength, and you can, and you will, or you get all of my tools. And so he moved forward, and he grasped the bamboo, and he said, ah! And he looked at his hands, and thousands of little slivers of something were in his skin, and it felt like fiberglass. And the demon laughed at him and he said, grasp the pole. And so he grabbed it again, and those little things that apparently were stuck to or part of the bamboo impaled him in large numbers, very small, not enough to stop him from being able to hold it, but it was definitely not something he enjoyed, and he wondered how he would ever pick out all of those things so he could sleep. And the demon laughed at him and said, sleep? There is no sleep here. You are in hell for a reason. You are a very, very naughty boy. You will suffer for all of eternity, and I will make sure of it. Put it on your head and twist. So he put it on his head, and he spun himself around, and as he did, the bamboo splintered into many strips, and smaller pieces pushed their way into his skin. And the more that he twisted, the more bamboo splinters and those tiny little things like hairs, like fiberglass, pushed themselves into his skin and his muscles. And finally, he had the entire bamboo pole around his head to the point that his hands were trapped by them. He couldn't have gotten free without untwisting, spinning back the way he had come. And so the demon said, hold! And he held in that position for what felt like an eternity, his head bleeding profusely. What he didn't know, for he didn't understand what spirits bleed. It was all falling into ruts at his feet, flowing away. He didn't know from seeing, he could only hear. It seemed there was far more than any amount of blood that he'd ever had in his body. So again, the demon said, hold! As he started to turn. And another eternity seemed to pass. And finally the demon said, release! So he released. And as he released, some of the splinters pulled out of his head, which was excruciating, but others stayed in his head, in his hands, and then there were those little hairs, which he now had on both sides of his hands, in between his fingers, you can imagine that, if you've ever handled fiberglass, you know what I'm talking about. And finally, he had it unrolled from around his head, and the demon said, "Release!" And he released it, and he looked through the bloodish stuff that was seeping from his head and his hands, and he saw that the bamboo was once again whole, and his stomach sank. And the demon looked down, and he took a scoop of whatever it was that was coming out of him, and he drank it. And he said, not good enough. Take the second one, wrap it around your neck, and turn until you can turn no more. So he repeated it, going through what seemed like another eternity, before finally the demon let him release it. And some of the bamboo splinters came out, some of them stayed in, and his neck was covered in the bamboo hairs. And this happened again and again and again, until his entire body was lacerated and full of bamboo hairs and splinters, and he was in such pain, but he couldn't pass out. His soul could not relinquish consciousness because he was not in a body. He looked horrible. The gutter was practically overflowing with his essences, and the demon was enjoying drinking it. And then the demon said, "Start again!" And then the man understood that there is no such thing as the lesser of evils.